Even though professional drag racing has grown into a massive industry and a fully developed pro motorsport in the modern era, back in the swinging 60s when the sport was first starting out, every driver, like Don Prometer Don Garrett, had a fair shot at winning. In an era when the only rule was getting paid and having fun to do it, there were three men, Sheldon Connett, Bob Davis, and Junior Brogdon, who would own and operate three of the most entertaining and bizarre California funny cars that we are looking at today. The cars of this era begin to suffer from the problem Californians look at. At the drag strip by 1966, Sheldon "Shell" Connett was living the good life. He had built a successful business with his Compton, California service center, Speed Shop, and had a string of interesting cars, including an Aston Martin Hot Rod, a little British car with a big American motor, and more. But he was itching for something even bigger. Connett became fixated on the idea of creating a funny car out of a large luxury vehicle. He didn't care about its raw performance, he just wanted it for fun, and the money it would bring in from track operators. This is all based on the story of Peanuts, the largest funny car in drag racing history. Aesthetic value for a vehicle of that type, as it would attract spectators and, as is the case with certain individuals like Shel Fade Intervade. In 1965, engineers made an intriguing discovery with the introduction of new full-size Fords. These featured improved construction methods, a stiffer body, a more forgiving chassis, and higher quality materials. When the Fade value was improved, the Fords after that date. During the building process, Ford engineers managed to create a car with an interior that was noticeably quieter than the Rolls-Royce luxury cars of the time. The company's executives took full advantage of this idea and launched an advertising campaign dubbed The Quiet Man. The ads aired on television, in newspapers, and on all their other promotional materials. Ford actually constructed a lightweight shell of a Galaxy that resembled a real car. This was done in preparation for a TV publicity shoot involving the car's ascent to the peak of a mountain, but the concept was derailed when the company went to great lengths to generate publicity around it. Now that the mountain project was finished, the body was supposed to be destroyed. However, a friend of Convet's from either Ford or the ad agency informed him that the shell had been sent to California to remove its trim, and that it was going to be burned after fulfilling its purpose. Cue the wizardry, a plethora of phone calls and promises that Convey received. The body of this wild ride was composed of 1-inch thick fiberglass with a steel roof for the vinyl top. The entire vehicle weighed 600 illibes, and that was before Ford or the agency removed most of the ornamentation and chrome. After spending 2 months of nights and weekends at a Ford dealership, they managed to replace the missing side trim with parts they bought themselves. They then constructed a 175-pound chassis out of 2x3 mild steel box tubing, added a roll bar, and mounted it on Astro wheels. Finally, they slapped some Goodyear slicks on the back, and the result was a finished product. The world's first ever luxury funny car, named Peanuts, was built on a 1:1 scale model of a Ford LTD. It featured a 49-inch Outback with 410 gears and an Art Car Torque Flight engine. The body was a 131-inch wheelbase with semi-elliptical springs on the corners. There's a blown motor mounted where the dashboard of a regular LTD would be. The first engine in the car was a blown big block Chevy, but that was just for testing purposes. They ran the car through its paces on the drag strip to ensure it handled well and wouldn't crash as they raced. They were working out the details of constructing a flat-track racing car with a flat-head 671-cylinder, blower 392 Chrysler engine that could run gasoline. This monstrosity could reach speeds of 160 miles per hour with the help of a 14-ton parachute. And Comet claimed that it weighed 3,200 pounds, which seems excessive to me. And he had this vision for a massive, heavy-duty luxury vehicle. Now, you might be exaggerating a bit, but let's be honest, this thing was a heavyweight by any standard. However, it wasn't the heaviest funny car in California. We'll get to that one shortly. A couple of other things with Peanuts. The car initially had some serious issues, and at 140 magnitudes, the body, with its enormous front end and massive empty engine bay, was acting as a massive low-pressure area, which caused the front end to get light at the top end, and more than just get light, would pull the front end up and do wheelies across the vast amount of landscape that was left untapped. During one of the exercises, drivers like D and others used a windshield, which functioned like a giant spoiler, and the air pressure acting as a big hand to keep the front of the nose down. This worked better than hanging 250 pelts of lead off the front axle, which didn't work. The car was driven by Keaton with unrelenting vigor at match races and appearances at venues such as Lions Drag Strip, San Fernando, Irwindale, and many more. It was frequently booked because the people loved seeing something so big and fast trying to defeat more ordinary competition. Gigantic vehicle. One of the most peculiar aspects of this entire affair is that following its retirement in 1967, no one seems to have known what became of it. It vanishes from sight, never appears in any collection, and, well, the hard truth is that the car was probably just dismantled and discarded. Yesterday's bizarre race car was an absolute hoot. The most ironic part was probably the price con, which claimed to have $22,000 invested in the project. The whole thing was made by Bargain Basement. They got the body for free, assembled the chassis out of random shop supplies, and used the cheapest engine you could find. Assembled a 392 Hemi to run on fuel. Opulent bodywork, yes. Extravagant budget, no. But as a follow-up act, Shell had a plan. He constructed a Jaguar XK flopper. Snoopy. Regrettably, the driver hired to pilot it died in a terrible crash one night, but the car was salvaged and is now on display at the Chateau. The tragic driver who died that fateful night was Johnny Hoffman, but he was better known by his professional nickname, Mac. Sheldon Comet was a major player in the aftermarket. He built his service center chain into a dominant force in California's speed shop industry. I mentioned that it wasn't the heaviest funny car in California because the next one is Bob Davis thought he really had something, and he was the one who designed the trophies that SEMA still gives out to this day, which recognize innovation and excellence in the aftermarket. So, that's the little backstory of Peanuts. In 1965, Davis had an intriguing big block AO65 Impa drag car, but nobody else seemed to notice. He was frustrated that his powerful machine was ignored in favor of wild match race cars, while class racers often took a back seat. Instead of wallflowering, Bob Davis devised a scheme. He was going to become a member of the Match Racers Club, and surely people would be interested in an A50 MV version of his car. Oh, and before anything else, he started by contacting his friends Mike Cardini, Bill Carr, and Norm on a weekly basis at Competition Paint and Body to secure sponsorship. The 3,980 lb stock and POWs diet led to the replacement of fiberglass for the car's fenders, trunk, hood, and other panels. The interior was gutted, with gauges and other components removed. Thin carpet was laid down, and a fiberglass bucket seat was installed. That was pretty much it for the essentials. Now to the exciting part, the drivetrain. Davis was a gifted engine builder. He meticulously restored a 427 Chevy, getting every part machined to perfection, swapping out the pistons while preserving the stock rods, and preparing it for a one-of-a-kind piece of speed equipment. His friendship with Demar Ray, a man at Keir Industries, led to the creation of the first Keir blower intake. The manifold was custom-made for a big block Chevy. It wasn't the first model, but he was the one who tested it before the company sold it. A 671 blower was mounted on top of the manifold, with an old-school Enderley twin-door injector that supplied the engine with methanol straight. Eventually, Port Art Car customized a TorqueFlite transmission for the 1966 model year, which ran on straight alcohol. The transmission was connected to the engine through a 2100 RPM stall converter and drove a 456-geared 12-bolt rear axle with 10 1/2-inch wide Goodyear tires. Nozzles were added when nitromethane was introduced to the program. On runs, he would shift the gears at 7,000 RPM using a push button mounted on a stand in the cockpit, and he used slicks on the corners. Davis made one significant modification to the frame, welding in a small tubular crossmember ahead of the engine, and then cutting the factory crossmember in the middle, leaving a gaping hole. For the purpose of accessing the oil pan and checking the engine bearings at the bottom, he welded flanges to the frame, and then constructed a piece of tubing with matching flanges on one end. This allowed him to easily remove the center section of the crossmember during racing. It may not have been particularly noteworthy, but to me it just seemed like one of those drenched in green paint and bearing the name of the Jolly Green Giant on the rear quarter panels. This racer was transformed into Bob Davis's Off to the Races. It could reach speeds of 150 miles an hour on straight alcohol, and even faster when nitro was applied. The rear suspension was completely stock, but the left rear coil was essentially the left rear coil in the rear end. The car's suspension was modified to reduce ride height by 2 inches, but aside from that, it used stock parts in the rear end and had a maximum of 2 inches of travel in the front. Davis admitted in interviews that driving the car at full speed was challenging. Now, it was a match race hit, and even ran some of the big advantages. For example, this footage was shot by my childhood friend Dar Hawthorne at the 1966 NHR Winter Nationals in Pomona. My dad had given him a 16-cylinder camera for Christmas, and he even had starting line access. Needless to say, this wasn't a banner run for the car, Jolly Green Giant, but seeing it in action is breathtaking in and of itself. What's even more bizarre is that this car was the ideal match race partner for the Peanuts Ltd. The two teams competed in countless match races against one another, with the crowds going wild over the prospect of two enormous cars crashing head-on at 150 mips while spewing smoke from their nitro engines. There are a plethora of newspaper clippings from this era in Southern California that highlight these two cars at many weekends. After racing the Impala, Davis briefly raced a more sensible Corvette funny car before he had to prioritize his career due to family health issues. His drag racing career was brief, but the Jolly Green Giant undoubtedly made it notable. He stepped away from the sport to focus on caring for his family and running his business. Junior Brogdon, on the other hand, began his drag racing career in the first half of the 2000s. He began the 1960s on the right foot with a string of successful Ford stock and super stock entries, but he eventually developed an itch to go faster. much like Bob Davis. He also witnessed the wealth and fame enjoyed by the men who raced fun cars, which meant anything one could imagine at the time. In the same vein as Bob Davis, Brogdon understood that grabbing attention would be crucial to securing bookings from track promoters and standing out from the crowd. He achieved just that by skillfully grafting a heavily modified Mustang body onto a relatively short dragster chassis, accentuated by its pinch width and absurdly long hood. The Pony Brogan's Melon was positioned at the back window of the dragster, which is a Mustang. Looking down the nose of a front-end dragster with the wheels far ahead of you must be fascinating. But trying to picture yourself peering down the nose of an aircraft carrier landing deck hood is even more mind-boggling. The car's origin story begins with a nitro-injected 289 that was enlarged to approximately 350 cubic inches at one point. The vehicle utilized a tandem configuration of these engines, a very short-lived, because Brogan was unable to get them to cooperate when coupled. He eventually abandoned the tandem configuration and installed a blower on a single engine, which became the standard setup for this race. What's fascinating is that, according to reports and historical context, the blown small block Ford on nitro gave that Ford badge some credibility with a fake pony. However, it's also possible that the promoters of Junior Brogan's Real Genius booked this car into open shows and other events because it was obviously not legal for any kind of sanctioned class-style legal competition. Match races, like these humorous car shows, were essentially like wrestling events back then. They were shows with heroes and villains, plot twists, and announcers getting buried. With its low weights reaching nearly 170 m/h, Brogan's car provided the ideal foil for announcers and beer-swilling fans to get enthused about. It wasn't a, quote, real car like the more traditional-looking beasts, but it was fast enough to be entertaining, exploding to the same degree as it actually did during the 1960 Summers of California Funny Car match. But seriously, take a look at this and try not to laugh. The point is that all three of these cars existed simultaneously and competed in a plethora of the same events. It's interesting to note that all three of these cars were based in California. Brogdon and Conant made occasional trips to Arizona, but that was about it. Davis, on the other hand, never left the state, as far as anyone can tell, with a Jolly Green Giant. This fact alone speaks volumes about the magnitude of the drag racing scene in California during the "We have a blown nitro-burning Chrysler-powered Ford, a blown nitro-burning big-block Chevy Impala, and a blown nitro-burning small-block Ford." In the 60s, you could run any of these cars practically continuously without ever crossing state lines. The big question is, which one would you choose to drive? What do you think of this dragster that's posing as a Ford Mustang with Ford power? I'm Brian Loans, and I appreciate you watching, liking, and subscribing. In order to spice things up every once in a while, strange and perpetually eccentric car and technical substance.